Yes, so thrilled to have all of you join us again for another episode of the Nonprofit Show. We like to start every show saying our gratitudes to our presenting sponsors. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all of these amazing sponsors that you see in front of you. I say this every show, but we really do mean it. They are here and invested not only in these episodes, but in you, in the work you do in your community, all around the globe. They're really here to support your mission and your cause to make your life easier. So thank you to our sponsors. And of course, thank you to Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I don't know what I would be doing during this hour block or, time block of my day. So I really appreciate this wonderful idea that came up in the middle of the March during COVID, or I should say, in the beginning of the COVID days. And we're going strong. So Lindsay, you're joining us in episode 230 plus. Maybe 235. So we've come a long way, and we're just really thrilled for how the episodes have taken place. I'm Jarrett Ransom. I serve as the co-host. I'm also known as the Nonprofit Nerd, and I'm CEO of my own consulting firm, the Raven Group. So thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And please help me welcome our guest. And Julia, I'm going to pass it on to you to introduce Lindsay.
Oh my God, you are such a coward. I cannot believe
you want to practice.
You can do it. You can
practice.
do it.
Oh my God, Jarrett Ransom, the Nonprofit Nerd, just like punted. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you're going to have to help me out because we've got a fabulous guest on, which came to us via the Nonprofit Nerd. Oh my God, I said the first name wrong because I'm so freaked out about the last name. Lindsay Kichevsky.
Kievsky.
Oh, Kievsky.
So close.
Kievsky. Okay, well, we're gonna have to revisit this, Lindsay.
I'll give you another opportunity, Julia.
Oh my gosh. Well, Lindsay, you are an associate with Sea Change Capital, and we're really excited to have you on today to talk about the issues surrounding the opportunities with collaboration. And again, this has been one of the biggest things we've seen funders really pushing nonprofits to collaborate. And I'm thinking of, in my state, a food bank system where ultimately a few years ago, major funders said, we're not going to fund these individual food banks. We live in a state that's very diverse, physically, geographically, culturally, linguistically. But these funders were just like, it's too much. It's too much to deal with the same concepts with all these different groups. You guys have got to come together, kind of form a coalition, and then we'll fund from there. Super stressful, super controversial. And so that has like stuck in my mind every time we talk about this amazing topic. So let's start with Sea Change, what the organization does, and then we'll navigate from there.
Sounds good. Yeah. So thanks to both of you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. But I come from Sea Change Capital Partners, and we're an organization that champions nonprofits first and foremost, but especially when facing complex challenges. And we serve as a partner for those looking to help. So we serve as a bit of a connector between nonprofits and the broader ecosystem, funders, consultants, et cetera. So we've helped organizations put processes into place to manage risk. We make grants and loans to encourage and support mergers, joint ventures, divestments, other types of reorganizations that we broadly call sustained collaborations. So we'll hear that, and I can explain it further a little later on throughout. We even help organizations to responsibly wind down. So anything that kind of is looking at a fundamental shift in business structure while looking at a way to retain mission, maybe transcendent of organizational boundaries. That's broadly what we do. We do it. I'm happy to share a little more about what I specifically do there, which is grant making for this type of work.
Yeah. So now weave together how you and Jarrett know one another and have worked together. Because I
Yeah,
think this is interesting. And I was
great.
not aware of this until just in the
Like
chit
10
chat.
minutes ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
so
connective tissue makes stuff fun.
yeah.
Um, so I manage one of Sea Change's 3 grant making funds. It's called the Sea Change Lodestar Fund for Nonprofit Collaboration. And we also um, have a grant making fund locally that serves the city of New York, and a grant making fund that locally serves the city and surrounding metropolitan area of Philadelphia. So these 3 funds make grants to nonprofits looking to either explore or go through the process of planning one of these collaborative structures. So the way that I got to know Jared initially is those 3 funds are members of a national network that Sea Change also hosts and administers called the Sustained Collaboration Network. That is a network of 8 funds around the country that do the same type of grant making work. So our 3, and then there's one that serves the city of Los Angeles, Dallas, Austin, Pittsburgh, and then our first statewide fund, which serves the state of Arizona. And so these funds are working together to normalize the conversation around collaboration, share best practices and stories. And Jared is participating in our first ever training institute for consultants and those who facilitate the work.
And it has been eye-opening. I think there's 6 sessions within this institute, and I just found out this morning from Lindsay Kievsky that there are
There you go.
Oh my God, you are such a show off. I
there's
cannot
like
believe-
115, 100 to 20 other individuals in the institute. So that's really been really, really cool to learn from them, as well as to connect, like you said, Lindsay Kievsky, with other consultants within the community.
I am keeping score, so this is good.
Oh my God, I am doomed.
Oh my
I-
gosh. We are
I
just
am-
being so silly, Lindsay. So
I am
you
I love
doomed.
just as fun with this conversation.
Oh, Lord.
But I really do appreciate the conversation and really what you said about normalizing the conversation. I've worked with a variety of different organizations, and when the word collaboration comes up, they're like, nope, don't talk about that, right? And so why is it so complicated?
Yeah, so there is some historical taboo associated with the word collaboration, especially where nonprofits come in, because traditionally it's been viewed by the funding community as something that occurs when a nonprofit is not doing so well, right? When you're really struggling to be able to fulfill the mission that you're there to fulfill. So the first thing I'd like to think about is wording, right? Let's discuss what we mean by the sort of what we call big C collaboration, but sustained collaboration. There's, situations where nonprofits will work together to put together a program or an event or, something that is complementary and that they can both contribute to. That is not the type of work that we are funding and sort of carving out this niche for. It is those longer term, more formal coming together that shifts business practices. And so 80% of what we see in that portfolio is exploring mergers usually, but we do look at other forms as well, like shared space, joint venture, et cetera. And the reason that it's so complicated, right, is you're looking at potentially integrating all facets of an organization. And so you're looking at finances, organizational culture, programs, staffing models. And that's just the internal considerations, right? So then you have to look outward to your donors and the folks who participate in your programs. Some organizations have really sort of strong community standing where there's allegiance to a specific name or a specific person who works within the program. So it can be hairy. Those are some of the really large reasons why people might get a little concerned when thinking about that.
And I'm curious, have you seen this conversation become more prevalent since the pandemic?
Yes. So absolutely. I think that
Interesting.
and as a funder who funds this type of work specifically, we certainly do not see it as a sort of taboo subject. It's something that we encourage organizations to be thinking about at all cycles of their life, and something that should just be part of the normal strategic planning conversation, knowing who else is doing similar work or work that could contribute to yours, and thinking about those ways to potentially work together. But yes, because of the pandemic, obviously, like altering the entire landscape, we've not only seen an uptick sort of in terms of demand for the grant making funds, but we've also seen people considering this far earlier on in the conversation. So whereas a typical call might be two organizations have already decided that they would like to formally explore, I'm now getting more calls from one organization thinking like, how would I even begin this process responsibly? We've also seen a lot of really innovative ideas about crossing, our funding is pretty limited to the nonprofit sector, but looking at some really interesting partnerships with either for-profit, social enterprise, or governmental structures too.
Right. So let's explore that a little bit more. I mean, how does a nonprofit find, and then we want to add the word fund, because I think that's one of the things is that, there are a lot of costs associated with this. And a lot of times you want to do your homework up front so that if there are problems, you kind of, how to navigate them or a path. These things cost money. So I'd love for you to kind of talk us through that part of it.
Yeah. So in terms of finding a partner, right? That's one of the pieces that's especially subjective in the process, because you don't know what type, I can't look at an organization from the outside or from its financial statements or even, its mission statement and understand from within where the places that could be bolstered by a partnership lie. So a good place to start for nonprofits who are considering this is what we call at Sea Change the M.A.K.E.R framework, which is a fun little acronym. The M stands for mission. So this can be used as a self-assessment tool or a partnership tool in tandem with another organization or two to understand if there's a there is sort of how we say it. But so M is mission. What is your mission? What is your culture? How do you define and measure success? Assets is the A. What are your assets, both tangible and things like institutional knowledge or a really unique sort of facet to a program. K is keepers. What must we keep? Like, what is a non-negotiable, no matter what partnership we choose to enter? E is events. So what challenges or opportunities lay ahead? What types of sort of events are we either reacting to or sort of proactively trying to solve for on the front end? And an example of that, because that one's a little bit more ambiguous from the group, is, for instance, a planned succession of an executive director, right? And he says they're going to step down in 2 years. Are you going to enter an executive search process? Are you looking to maybe join forces with someone else who could solve for that? And then R is reality. So how much time, money, and internal capacity do we really have for this? Because as we all know, nonprofits are very busy places. And so people can't just put down their usual program and devote all the energy to this. You still need to be running your program, raising your money, et cetera, raising more money, because one of the biggest kind of myths to collaboration is that there's an enormous cost savings element, whereas that is often not the case. So how much time, money, internal capacity, and bandwidth do we really have to undergo this process?
That makes it very easy to understand. And I wonder if these conversations should actually happen as you're forming your organization, or maybe even, regularly, right? Like, is this something that we want to consider during our annual board retreat or every other year? Just if this were to come into our, space, when might we consider a collaboration, and what type of collaboration would we be willing to talk about?
Totally. It's a really great tool. I cannot take the credit for this tool. My colleague, Jess Cavanero, who runs our New York fund, put it together, synthesized all of our learnings so wonderfully with this framework. But yeah, it's a really useful tool just for gaining that internal clarity, even if you're not looking to actively enter a partnership anytime soon. Julia, I didn't want to forget the second part of your question,
No.
how they fund a collaboration.
Yeah.
So there are certainly, and as we know, in the nonprofit sector, so many funds can be tied to program or specific pieces of the business, right? So you do need to find ways to raise money often to cover these pieces. So usually you're looking at an aggregate of sources. Community foundations are really good places to look because they understand on the local level, the importance that the organizations looking to collaborate play to the people who are served. Capacity building funders are a good place to look. There are usually some funds contributed either from reserves or from the board, but also those SCN funds, that the Sustained Collaboration Network that I listed at the beginning, that's what we're here for. So if you live in one of those local geographies where there's a fund on the ground, you should look at approaching that initiative manager to find out more about their grant making processes. And if you don't live somewhere where there's a local fund on the ground, then you would be eligible to apply to the Sea Change Lodestar Fund, which I run, because my only geographic parameter is that I can't I can't consider a grant commitment when there's a local fund on the ground.
Sure.
Okay.
That makes
cool.
sense. So there's resources regardless. I think that's phenomenal, because I really think, really what comes often in my conversations is we cannot even begin to consider that. But I really think, when it comes to going through the acronym, the M.A.K.E.R acronym, and then also knowing that there are resources and funds to literally help you with this conversation and the collaboration. And I love that it's Sustained Collaboration Network, right? It's not just collaboration and you go away. This is still sustaining. And I think we all know, and our viewers as well, that word sustaining has really been a huge buzzword in our community, in our nonprofit sector. So why not tag it into collaboration as well?
Absolutely.
Before we move on to my next question, do you have any idea of what an average cost of a collaboration would be? And I'm thinking of getting MOUs done, memos of understanding, any legal work, maybe accounting or audit reviews. Do you have any general concept that would help us understand the reality of the investment that needs to be made moving forward?
It runs the gamut. I know that's such a, non-answer, but
No.
we can look at, I think the best way to consider the costs is to separate them out into the two tranches that we actually make grants specific to these two stages, right? So there's the exploratory phase. And that is your initial diligence process with and these can look different, obviously, based on your organization's size or structure or any of those pieces. But the end goal of an exploration is having the information necessary to present to your boards to get a formal vote as to whether to move forward with an MOU, right? And so that phase, I would say you're likely looking at an average of $15,000 to $25,000, probably all in, if you choose to engage a third-party facilitator to help you with that. If you're doing some smaller organizations or some organizations that have more in-house capacity, can do a lot of sort of self-guided assessment to get a lot of those pieces checked off. But then when you move from exploratory into what we call the implementation phase or planning phase, that's where the costs can really sort of differ, right? So I'll share a couple of, the common costs we see there. Obviously legal, we're looking at financial diligence, stub audits, integrating your books, IT integration, getting everyone on the same systems, HR integration, making sure that, pay scales are uniform and all of that. And then there's like those really, we call them, broadly, unsexy but necessary hard costs. So things like moving expenses and early lease termination fees, things like that. I would say the average for, two kind of mid-size organizations, you might be looking in that $50,000 to $80,000 range, but it can be far lower. We have an implementation recently funded where the only costs amounted to like $8,000, and then there are ones that cost tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands. So
sure. Well, I appreciate you giving us that kind of range, because I think that that's one of the things that a lot of times seems to pop up as a surprise. It should not be a surprise, but I think it's really an important discussion to have. As to Jarrett's point, you might be thinking about, how do we even react?
Right.
What are the things that we need to be looking at? So then we move forward and we're, doing this amazing journey. How do we know when it's even working?
Yeah. So I see this as kind of a two-part question, right? There's knowing when the process is working, because a good process we have found really matters in this work. So what things we're looking for in terms of a good process for the actual collaboration processes, we're looking at time to devote, demonstrated internal clarity around what we're looking to gain from the process, honest and upfront conversation between all of the collaborating parties, some amount of positive working experience with one another already. So that might just be limited to this type of actual diligence work. But if you've run joint programs in the past or something, that can sometimes be helpful. Yeah. Compatible missions and cultures, a clear understanding and agreement of what the end goal is. And we find that working with a third-party consultant like Jarrett, or one of the folks who's participating in the Institute who facilitates this work, is a really sort of key success metric to getting it all done. And then in terms of when the organizations are coming together or have completed a collaboration, success factors include things like keeping the needs of the community and clients at the center of whatever the new entity looks like. Compatible missions, once again, able to continue with business as usual for the foreseeable future, at least, right? We say like 6 to 12 months is that kind of nervous period when you're implementing. But those are some of the things we look for.
The honeymoon. We have a great question that just came in, and it says, do funders sometimes see the synergy and suggest a collaboration? If so, are they willing to fund those costs? I love that question.
I do too. And, we're kind of an odd case for this, right? Because we do not see the synergy and suggest collaborations. Everything that comes to any of the SCN funds is brought from the nonprofits themselves. I'm sure it happens, and if or when it does, I'm glad that funds like ours exist, because that's a big ask in terms of actual effort and time that you need to put into that, but then also finding someone to cover those costs. Hopefully we can at least defray that second piece. But yeah, we certainly, I just can't, right? With a national fund, how would I possibly be able to even do that?
Sure. Well, in budgeting that, right? Like you said, there's funds and there's resources out there, but I would venture to guess, and especially during 2020, this collaboration fell on a lot of people's plates without really any anticipation. So there was no budgeted or no forecast kind of, ideation when it came to this. but that's definitely a conversation that has been, increased over the last 11 months.
Definitely, definitely.
So along those lines, and our time is almost up, which is like crazy hard to believe.
So fun.
I know. How, to Jarrett's point, these things can fall into your lap, or maybe they're stress induced. Ultimately, what might sound like a good marriage at the beginning doesn't turn out to be, and you have some problems.
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah. So some common challenges that we see arising are, number one, I'll keep driving it home because it's important, allocating the time necessary for those negotiation meetings, for the due diligence process, producing documents, sharing those in a timely manner. It's a heavy lift. Board engagement and availability and their support of the process is also, if that isn't established clearly and early on, that can become a concern. When to communicate the process to staff and navigating those concerns, but then also when to communicate externally as well. And then the last couple of things I'd think about would be navigating any power dynamics. If you have two really great EPs and you have to figure out how those individuals will play into a new structure, that can be difficult. And then cultural integration and change management. This piece is one of the squishiest or softest, but it's extremely important. So we recommend revisiting these things early and often throughout the process, and a qualified third-party facilitator is worth their weight in gold in being able to do that.
Wow, amazing. Well, I've learned so much. I'm so excited, Jarrett, that you're marching along on this, of which we hadn't talked about. So
no, we hadn't, but always, I would say 9 times out of 10, when I'm serving as an interim executive director, this conversation comes up, or at least the idea or the thought concept of, are we still relevant? Will these continued practices, remain for a sustained success of the organization? Might we consider a collaboration? So that's really, through my interim executive work, I wanted to know more about how could I best serve the community when it does come to this, collaboration concept.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely a conversation that we need to be having more of. And there's just so much to talk about. I'm really excited for folks to learn more. And I see you laughing.
You got it.
Okay, I got it. Lindsay Kichevsky.
Kievsky.
Oh, Lindsay. Oh, I totally failed you, sister. And that's a shame because Lindsay, you're a great mind. And I've so enjoyed what you've had to say. Check out the cchangecap.org website. Very, very interesting. And I just see this, Jarrett and I offline have been talking about, major trends that we see moving across the nonprofit landscape. And this has been one of them.
Definitely one of them, right? Remember when we had on the Utah Association representative, and she was saying that, I want to say, oh gosh, was it 20+%, 30?
Yeah, almost 30% of all the nonprofits in Utah.
Yeah, throughout the state said that they may not make it through the pandemic. So really looking at that collaboration conversation then, and that was several months ago. So this is definitely a conversation that has been front and center. It still carries that taboo weight, but thank you so much, Lindsay, to you and the rest of your team at Sea Change, your partners there, to normalize this conversation. Because again, I really believe that this is something we can talk about early and often so that it's not taboo, right? It's one of those things that we continue to consider so that we do know when the opportunity arises or an issue arises that we've already thought through that acronym of M.A.K.E.R. And I love that you said Jessica?
Jessica, yeah, Cavanero.
Yeah, shout out to Jessica, because that, I mean, our sector is filled with acronyms, but that's a really good one that I'm going to hang into.
Yeah, that's one to know. Hey, everybody, another great episode. I'm Julia Patrick with the American Nonprofit Academy, joined by the nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom, CEO of the Raven Group. Amazing discussions. Again, we're only going to be offering this for a couple more days. Actually, our nonprofit executive coaching, reach out to either one of us. We both have different views. Especially since Jarrett's almost 20 years older than I am, you know, we have that thing.
I've had a lot of work done, but it looks great.
Okay, Lindsay, we tease about this. I'm 20 years older than Jarrett. I'm 20 years older, so we do have different views. But more importantly, we share the same view, and that is how important our sponsors are to us. You know, we work with these people all the time, and they are so passionate about the work they do and how they serve the nonprofit sector. It gives me a tremendous amount of hope and pride, and that these folks are behind us and supporting us. Wow, amazing. So we want to say we're very, very grateful. Another great episode. We are so delighted that Lindsay joined us from Capital C Change or cchangecap.org. And we are going to leave you with our mantra that we say every day, and we truly mean it. Stay well so you can do well. And we'll see you back here tomorrow.